Good morning. Welcome to week 13 of Anthropology 309W. First of all, I asked you all to check in with me last week, and a lot of you did, about how you're doing with all of this social isolation and things that are going on in the world. And I really appreciate hearing those responses. And I'm going to tell you, this was a terrible week for me. My husband no longer has a job due to all this, so that's a little bit stressful. My kids are at home all the time. They are in 2nd and 5th grade, so we're trying to do some homeschooling with them. And they've been so cooped up that my son went for a walk last week and broke his 2 bottom teeth out. So we get to try to see some emergency dentist and endodontist on top of all of this. So I know that this isn't a lot compared to what some of you are going through, and I'm not trying to get your pity or anything like that. I just wanted to give you a little update on how things are going for me, so that you don't think that somehow I'm completely disconnected from what's going on in the world and what's going on in your lives. And as I've said from the beginning of the semester and in every video that I've posted, I don't want you to feel like if you missed a deadline or you didn't get to something or you're falling behind, that is going to affect whether or not you can be successful in this class, especially with the online format. I've been saying over and over, and I want to reiterate that the thing I'm most concerned about is that you get something out of this class. And so if you feel like you need to change something, please just let me know. Please just get in touch with me and we'll make a plan for how you can be successful in this class. I have not been very strict about deadlines since the beginning of the semester. That's not something that I put in my syllabus. That's not one of my big things like it is for some other faculty. And so maybe I haven't reiterated it enough in this online that I am not going to be that strict about deadlines. Anyone who's reached out to me about getting an extension on those already knows that. But if you don't already know that, I just wanted to explain that. So this week, we're talking about anthropology of sexuality and the body. And this is just a little brief description of that. We don't have time to get into that whole field in just one week. But I've posted some videos for you. I think you'll find them interesting. The first one is a synopsis of the theory of Michel Foucault. And if you've studied cultural anthropology at all, you've probably heard of Michel Foucault. He's one of the best known theorists of sexuality, of power, of deviance, and things like that. And I think that this video does a really nice job with an overview of his theory. So I think that you'll find that interesting. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit for you right now. But first, I'm going to make some changes in our schedule. So let me show you my screen here. I'm going to show you the changes that I'm making. Okay. All right, so it's turning out that doing these rough drafts was, I think, going to work better in our in-person class. And I was really hoping to do peer reviews in class, and I've been trying to keep that up. And some of you have been doing an amazing job with it. And I really appreciate that you have been willing to step up and do the work that I've been asking you to do. But it seems like with the online format, doing those rough drafts every week is just getting to be too much for some people. And it's just seeming like we aren't getting to have that kind of in-person back and forth that I was hoping for when we're submitting these rough drafts. So I'm going to change it and make it so that the rough drafts for the rest of the sections are optional. That means you only need to submit for the rest of the semester your discussion posts each week on the weekly module. That's the main way that I'm going to be gauging participation and attendance, and that I have been. I just want you to reply to one of the discussion leaders' questions and then reply to 3 of your classmates' questions. If for some reason the discussion leaders don't do their posts in time, you can pose a question yourself. That's fine too. Just make sure that whoever starts the forum or starts the thread, that we all just reply to them, that the discussion board works much better that way. Your second field notes, if you haven't already turned those in, please turn those in to me like before. You can take a picture of them, you can scan them, you can email that to me, you can turn it in on BBLearn. I just want to see that you're somehow continuing to do your research project. If you have not been able to do participant observation, send me a description of what you have done. Send me your thoughts on it. Send me the notes that you've been taking. Show me that you've been thinking about the project. The rest of your reading responses, but I'm going to allow you to drop your 3 lowest scores, and I'll just average the rest of your final score out of 70. So if I drop your 3 lowest, if those were 0s and you have some 6s and 7s, I'll average the 6s and 7s to get to that 70 points. If that's confusing and you don't understand it, please let me know and I will go through it with you. Then you need to do a short, maybe, I think I put 10 minutes in the schedule, but as we're watching these videos, 10 minutes actually turns out to be a pretty long video to watch. So you can do maybe a 5-minute video. If you need to make it a little bit longer, that's fine, but a 5-minute or so video or audio, just a description of what you found in your ethnography, the most interesting things. Teach us something about it. What did you learn? How does it relate to cultural anthropology? This shouldn't be a really hugely stressful thing. It's just an opportunity to share your work with your peers and with me. And then the last thing is your final written ethnography paper, which is due on May 5th. And I've posted the rubric. It's for all of the sections. It's in the assignments folder. I'm going to be posting guidance on each section as we go, as I have it scheduled in the week. So hopefully you'll kind of work on those sections along with me, even though I'm not asking you to turn in those rough drafts for credit. So what this means for the class is that the total points will change. That means the class was originally out of 500 points. Now it'll be out of 420 points. You can still get feedback on your drafts. I'm not saying that I'm not willing to review those rough drafts. Of course, if you want me to review your rough drafts, please continue to send them to me. If you would rather I still grade them and still have your points out of 500, you are welcome to do that too. If this is something that you're feeling like you really want those grades on the rough drafts, I am happy to continue to grade those. You can just let me know if you prefer to stay on the 500 points that it was originally planned to be, and you would rather have me continue to grade those. If you would rather get feedback without a grade, just tell me that too. Say, here's my draft. I would really love some feedback. I don't want this to be graded. I just want some feedback to see if I'm on the right track. And I will be happy to do that as well. So here's how the points breakdown is going to look with this change. So you can see the 3 sections that were due this month, I have crossed out. So that takes 80 points off of our total. So then you're looking at 420 points total instead of 500. This means attendance and participation is weighted more heavily than it was even, and it's already heavily weighted. And that's because I really do want you to engage in those modules. That said, I have no intention of giving anyone a B in this class when they should have gotten an A because of their attendance. I'm going to be looking at your participation, which includes that you've turned in all of the assignments. So at the end, I'm going to be looking at kind of an overall, how did you do in the class? And that's what that grade is going to be based on. So if you're concerned about that, please let me know. That grade that's in BBLearn is just based on you were in class this day, you weren't in class this day, and it is not a final kind of show of how I'm going to assess that. So turning in your projects, turning in your final project audio or video presentation, turning in your ethnography, I'll take all those things into account. Did you keep in touch with me? Did you give me feedback? Whatever it is, I will be looking at all of that. So don't feel like you get in there and you look at that attendance grade and you're like, oh, okay, I'm done. I can't get anywhere with this. Anything that looks like that to you, I would encourage you to get in touch with me about. And also just know that if you're looking at your grade and it looks like attendance is taking you down a grade, I'm probably not going to go that way. I will probably round that up if it's attendance that's bringing you down. I just have that attendance there because I really think that it is important to engage with the material, and when we're doing in-person class, it's really, really important to be in class. So I'm not taking it out, but I want you to know that I'm not going to base your final grade on whether your attendance is perfect or not. All right, so guidance on your ethnography sections. I already said I'm going to keep on giving you weekly guidance on different sections of the ethnography as I had planned. So I'm going to give you guidance this week on how to structure your methods section based on the rubric. So I'm going to go over the rubric with you and talk about how to structure that. First, before I get into the rubric, I'm going to just briefly talk about Foucault and Foucault's theory for this week on sexuality and the body. So Michel Foucault was a French social theorist, but one of the things that is interesting to know about him is that he was living in San Francisco in the 80s. Toward the end of his life, he was a gay man and he died from HIV/AIDS. And I think it's important to understand that as you get into his theory, because if you think of him as sort of like a bourgeois French theorist, I think it misses some of the insight that he had in what informed his theory and what kind of his lived experience that went into his theory of sexuality and the body and biopolitics and power. And those are some of the things that he's still really used for. So the first thing that he really argued is that knowledge is not neutral. We talk about facts. People have kind of like raised the idea of facts in class and have pushed back and said, you know, in cultural anthropology, we don't really stick with facts so much, because the problem with facts is that somebody's production of knowledge went into it. Science is always shaped by power relationships. And I've talked about this in class, but this is really coming from Foucault. He was one of the biggest kind of proponents of this theory. There are some others I've talked about, Latour and lots of other people who have talked about power, but in particular, Foucault was one of the first people to really critically look at statistics, population statistics, as a method of social control, and how are people governed through these kinds of statistics and through sort of what he called technologies of the self and technologies of the body. So he was really interested in how is power exercised in a way that we aren't aware of it, and that we exercise it on ourselves at the level of the body, at the personal, very individual level. So he looked at personal hygiene and things like that. Like, do you get on a scale and weigh yourself every day? And who told you that you should do that? And in whose best interest is it to stay the most healthy and the most fit? And he argued that it was in the best interest of whoever is in power and who's governing, because it saves money for the system in general. And he's not necessarily talking about governance as something negative or power as something negative, although often I think he was portraying it that way. He's really looking at, how do you govern? How can you successfully govern? And how can you get people to kind of conform? And this is interesting, thinking about this COVID-19 pandemic and what we're looking at with how could you get people to stay in their houses? How can you convince them to think about what this greater good that we sometimes hear about, which is a very problematic concept. And I'm sure you've probably heard that in some of your other classes, because not always everyone is included in the greater good. So who does the greater good include and who does it exclude? So who's the population in the population statistics that's protected, and who's the people that the population is being protected from, is another thing that kind of anthropologists are often interested in, and Foucault was interested in. So biopolitics and biopower were these levels of information where power is exerted. So it was at the population level, looking at biopolitics as politics of the body, of humans, of human capital. So the population level is information, statistics about group risk. So right now we've been hearing a lot about group risk. What's your actual chance of getting a disease? What's your chance of passing it to someone else? How does that look if you are immunocompromised? How does that look if you're elderly? What does it mean for you to think, well, I'm not at risk, but the population is? So that population level of risk is a way that people are managed, are governed, is his argument. And then the individual level is facts about individual bodies that lead us to govern ourselves. So when you go to the doctor and they say, you weigh this much, that means your BMI is 85, and that means you need to reduce your weight by 2 pounds to be in the normal range. Well, where does the normal range come from? Normal range isn't based on what's healthy or what's actually optimal health. It's based on a population average. So what's everybody like? What the perfectly middle one is what we're all supposed to be striving for. And this is really interesting because Foucault really criticizes statistics this way, because especially in health and the body, then you're conflating pathology or illness with a statistical norm. So anything that's outside of a statistical norm then can be portrayed as pathological. And we try to keep people, kind of keep pushing them to this central norm, this central kind of like, how do you keep people within the normal range of where we want people to be. So he was really interested in those practices. So self-governance, like I said, this expert knowledge and statistics gives us a way to think of ourselves. So like I said, stepping on the scale to see if you're in that range that you're supposed to be in. Are you conforming? Are you making sure that you don't cost the healthcare system extra money? That's what he was looking at. And then he's talking about, yes, absolutely, people are resisting norms. So deviance, he was really interested in deviance. How are people resisting norms? But the problem that he saw is that even when people are resisting norms, they still are resisting a norm. So what he argued is that even if you're saying, I'm going against this social norm, I'm gonna push against it, you're still acknowledging it as a norm. That was his argument, is that it's really, really hard to actually live outside of a norm, that they're so kind of positioned all around us in this way that society governs, that it's very difficult, even if you're countering a norm, if you're a member of a subculture, or if you're counterculturalist, you're still countering something that's accepted to be the norm, or and he was really critical of that. Why is there a norm? Where has this norm come from? And how could you actually live outside of it? So his idea, you'll hear him often cited about governmentality. So the organized principles, the mentalities, the rationalities, the techniques that we all take as kind of like, this is in everyone's best interest. These statistics tell us what healthy means. These statistics tell us where we fit in. He thought that this was part of how people are governed. And then his other theory that you may hear about, and they'll talk about in the film, is something called the panopticon. So the panopticon was this old invention, prison, where it's the guard power can see everybody all at once, but the prisoners can't tell whether the guards are ever looking at them. So the idea is this: you behave because you never know if someone's watching you. You never know if you might be under scrutiny in that moment. So you behave as though you're under scrutiny all the time. That was the idea of the panopticon prison. And he took that as a metaphor for how governance works in society, that you always conform to the rules because you never know if there might be someone evaluating you or watching you. So in that video, you'll hear a little bit more about that, and I hope that you'll find that pretty interesting. All right, so back to the rubric. So this is the methods and community description rubric. The methods and community description should be a little bit longer than your introduction. And I want to remind you that if your introduction, if you went with the 1 to 2 pages and you went with the just barely 1 page, that your final ethnography does need to be 15 pages. So on some of these sections, you're going to have to go with that upper range, because those ranges, the minimum isn't going to get you to 15 pages. So don't just try to do the bare minimum in your rough draft. It can be really helpful to write a little bit more and then cut it down when you're revising to get your writing nice and clear. So in the methods section, the way that I'm going to use the rubric, and hopefully you saw it in your introduction section, is I'm going to look at this. Okay, so the first one is, I want you to clearly and honestly describe your methods. What did you actually do? How many people did you talk to? In what way did you talk to them? How did you recruit them? Who were they? So the reader, me, should be able to tell exactly what you did to gather this data that you're reporting. And I'm going to have on my little rubric, okay, so if you have clearly described your methods and I can tell what you did to gather the data, I'll click that 5 points. So that's worth 5 points. The next one is, the methods description includes a clear description of steps used to analyze data. So the reader should be able to understand how you arrived at your observations. The analysis should include some coding process. So if you haven't done a coding process, you do need to do that, because I'm going to be looking for that in your methods section. How did you do your coding? How did you analyze your qualitative data? So we watched those videos on coding, and those are in the announcements if you missed them. You can find more on YouTube if you're unclear on how to do coding, but we went over it in class, and hopefully you have already started doing that with your data. So if you have described to me your coding process and it looks like you've done those steps to analyze your data and I can understand how you arrived at your observations, I'm going to give you 2.5 points for that. The next one is your community description. Your community should be clearly described. I should be able to tell where and with whom the research was conducted, not the specific place, because you should make it kind of anonymous, but the kind of place and the overall demographics of the place. What kinds of people were you talking to? What's the range of people? I'm going to give you 5 points if that's clearly described. If it's not, if it's just kind of okay, I can kind of tell, I'll give you 3.5 points. So that's how I'm doing this rubric, and I'm trying to make that really clear. So the next one is details are provided from participant observation. I can understand clearly what kinds of people you were observing and have some idea of the situations you were in. So your community is one thing, it's a little bit broader. And then who are you actually observing is a little bit different. So I want that description too. So both of those, so your community overall, and then who you actually got to observe and interact with. And that one is worth another 5 points. And then the last one is, why did you select this community? Your reason for doing this research should be really clearly explained in the context of cultural anthropology. So that's kind of like what you started with in your introduction. So transition back to that. This community is an interesting opportunity to learn more about social stratification in the workplace, or to learn more about gender norms, or to learn more about how people understand their position in a college club. Whatever it is, I just want you to tell me, how does this community tell you something in the context of cultural anthropology? So that's the things I'm going to be looking for in your methods section. So in your, on BB Learn this week, I have set up the readings. Then here's the video I talked about Foucault. It's only 8 minutes, and it will give you a very nice overview of Michel Foucault's theories. And then I have the week 13 discussion board set up. So hopefully our discussion leaders for this week will give us a nice couple of questions to discuss by tomorrow. And then I have also included this writing tips video. It's 15 minutes. It's about writing qualitative findings paragraphs. I'm not going to track your watching on that, but it's really, really helpful. This guy who produced the video goes over how to use a quote, how to give an introduction to the quote, and then how to summarize why the quote is important in the context of your project. So I really, really, really recommend watching this as you're thinking about writing your interpretation section, which is your qualitative findings section. This week, for writing your rough draft and community description, I've also included a lot of this a step-by-step sort of overview of how to describe a methods section. And this comes from Shona McCombs on Scribr. I adapted it, so it's edited quite a bit to be really just relevant to your kind of project, but that's where it came from. So explain your methodological approach. For most of you, that's ethnography and qualitative methods, but some of you might have conducted a survey or done some other methods, so explain that. The second one, describe your methods of data collection. Who did you talk to? How did you find those people? Outline those tools and materials. For quantitative methods, if you did a survey, how did you design your questions? What was your sampling method? How did you find people? For qualitative methods, did you do interviews? Did you do focus groups? How, where did you find people? How many people? Participant observation, what did you do? Did you sit down with a group? Did you participate in the activity? Did you just have to talk to people? Did you observe an online forum? What did you do? Step 3, describe your methods of analysis. This is where you describe your coding. What did you do? You shouldn't be presenting your results at this section. You should not be telling me what you found. You should be telling me, I designed this number of codes and here's what they are, and I used them to figure out what the themes were. So going back to that video that I posted here, look over how he talks about his coding process in there, and also go back to those videos that we watched about coding if you don't have good notes on them, and think about how to describe what you did for your coding. This has some nice tips, right, for your audience. Describe your community. And then again, I have your rubric copied in here. If you have questions, please feel free to let me know. But as I said at the beginning, these are now optional. So I am not going to grade. I'm not going to require you to turn in your draft of the methods and community description. So it definitely does need to be part of your final ethnography, and I'm going to grade it using that rubric, but you don't have to turn it in this week. You can turn it in to me if you want feedback, but you don't have to. I hope that this takes a little bit of pressure off of you, and if you have other comments and feedback, I would really, really like to hear them. Please don't make any decisions on dropping the class if you don't want to, or changing how your grading format is without talking to me. As I've said from the very beginning of the semester, if you are having trouble, please get in touch with me and we will make a plan for how you can catch up or how you can make sure you're successful in this class. I hope you have a good week, all of you, and please continue to send me emails and stay in touch.